Let's have a look then at Le Figaro. You've already referred to this, and you feel this is far more important than the leadership contest we have in the UK. But in Europe, there's 4 big jobs up for grabs this year. European Parliament President, European Commission President, the head of the European Central Bank, and the European Council President. 4 very important roles. Le Figaro is talking about the rift between Germany and France when it comes to who will get these jobs.
Well, it's not going to be a Brit, that's for sure, even if we are still members of the EU in God knows for how long. I'll tell you why I think this is important, and it relates to the next story on Denmark. And it might be that because of the rift between Germany and France, you get sort of a neutral, let's put it that way, such as Denmark stepping in and filling up some of these roles, and the Danes. And the reason that's important is because the Danish government is pushing a carbon neutral strategy, a really innovative, really pushing the boundary on this. And the reason that's important is because when you look at the 3 largest polluters in the world, China 30% of all pollution, CO2 emissions, US 15%, and the EU 10%. That's 55% of the world is China, US and EU. So if you get the Danes in there, maybe you get more of an environmentally friendly EU and pushing through even more regulations to cut back emissions. And I say this because, according to a BBC report, last year, 500,000 people have early deaths in Europe every year because of pollution.
It's an interesting time, though, isn't it, when you look at what's happening in terms of change. We have significant change here in terms of the leadership in the UK, what that means for Brexit. But
have you noticed it's all male-dominated, whether it's the UK election or the EU?
It is at the moment, but it'll be interesting to see what happens within
Maybe
the
with
EU.
Denmark it might not be, because in their leadership it's far more gender balanced.
Indeed. Well, let's have a look at that right now.
And that might mean more focus on the environment, because polls suggest women care more about the environment than men do.
Well, let's have a look then at that, and this paper in Denmark, which is talking about, you know, the coalition government and the deals that are being done there, and actually how the climate is such a big issue in all of this, and government policy going forward in Denmark, which could be quite radical.
And normally you'd think, story about Denmark on World News, who cares? The reason this is important is because they are part of the EU. And the reason that becomes important, not just for the reason I've already mentioned, that the EU is the 3rd largest polluter in the world, but also because the EU took, amongst other countries last year, the UK to court. So the European Commission took the United Kingdom to court for failing to live up to the regulations it was bound by in terms of NO2 emissions, in terms of pollution. Guess what? Leave the EU, nobody's there to take you to court anymore.
Talking of women that could be spearheading some of this is Margrethe Vestager, who's the European Competition Commissioner. She is in Denmark, of course, and she is a part of the social liberals there, but she is also one of the names that's put forward as a possible person who
for her environmental credentials.
One of these big roles coming up in Europe in this next year.